Ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a warm welcome to Ambassador Nikki Haley. Good evening, everyone. So they tell a story that when God created the world, He decided to create Israel. And God said, I'm going to make this beautiful land with mountains and valleys, flowing with beautiful rivers, with the most luscious fruit and vegetables, with milk and honey flowing, a land of milk and honey, with the most freshest fish from the Kinneret, and the most innovative and creative and courageous people living in this land of Israel. And the angels turned to God and said, God, don't you think you're being a little bit overly generous with one land? Don't you think the other countries are going to be a little bit jealous? And God says, not really. Just wait till you see who their neighbors are. Like the land of Israel, which is surrounded by many hostile neighbors, the UN is filled with many hostile neighbors to the land of Israel. And that's why it is such an honor to welcome a true and tested friend of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, Ambassador Nikki Haley. Ambassador Haley was senator in South Carolina. Not a lot of Jews. Governor. But yet, as she said many times, coming from an Indian family, she empathized and understood the plight of the Jewish people and spoke up so loudly and so clearly and called out the UN on its double standard when it comes to Israel time and again and again. And she was proud to declare in the hall of the UN that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish people. I just want to share a personal experience that I had. When I was 17 years old, in 1984, I was a follower, as I am, of the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And I would spend all the holidays at 770 Eastern Parkway with the Rebbe. In 1984, I was a teenager, 17 years old. It was Simchat Torah, the day that we dance and celebrate the completion of the Torah. There must have been 10,000 people in the room celebrating with the Rebbe, the most joyous night of the year. When in walked the new Israeli ambassador to the UN, Benjamin Netanyahu, and participated in the celebrations that evening. During the celebrations, the Rebbe called him up to the podium, and we watched as the Rebbe engaged in a deep conversation with Bibi. And when he concluded his conversation, everyone asked Bibi, what did the Rebbe tell you? And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told everyone, and he has repeated this many times, that the Rebbe said to him, you have been sent to a house of lies, to a hall of darkness. However, when you are in a hall that is completely and absolutely dark, if you even light one candle, that light can be seen in every corner of that hall. The Rebbe said, your mission in this hall of darkness and lies is to light a candle of truth for Israel and for the Jewish people. Governor, ambassador, you have been that candle of truth and light for the Jewish people, and we could never thank you enough. It is now my great honor to call upon Terry Castle, who will introduce our speakers this evening.
I don't have to introduce Nikki because you just heard that she was the senator from South Carolina. Okay, very quickly, because really the rabbi did a great job in introducing Nikki. Nikki was born in 1972 to immigrant parents, Sikh parents. Brown children and brown families were not that welcome at the time in South Carolina. And Nikki is a believer in hard work, discipline, persistence, truth, and so she prevailed. And ultimately, she became the governor of South Carolina. She had a magnificent 2 terms there, absolutely magnificent, focusing on the things that she continues to believe in, which is educational reform, a free America, job creation, free markets. And then she also had to deal with quite a bit of tragedy in Charleston, South Carolina, which maybe Carrie will get into when she's talking to Nikki. Already, the rabbi has talked about Nikki as a guiding light at the UN. It's a cesspool, we all know that, but Nikki prevailed there too. She's a friend of Israel, she's a friend of the Jewish people, but most importantly, she's an American, and she believes in America. And I hope we're going to get into some of the foreign policy issues as well in the conversation with Carrie Filippetti. Carrie Filippetti actually came to work for us at the Paul Singer Foundation before we had one. We were hoping to figure out what we wanted to do, who we wanted to support, where we were aligned, and we hired Carrie as our first employee, and she helped us build our foundation. And she stayed with us for about 5 years when she was actually recruited to work for Ambassador Haley at the UN, where she became her policy advisor, housed in Washington, D.C., and worked also for Nikki's deputy, John Lerner, there. After Nikki left the administration, Carrie, I think it was that time that you went to the State Department and worked for in Pompeo's administration. And I'll let Carrie talk a little bit more about the work that she did there. After she left the Trump administration, Carrie founded an organization which she's proud of. I'm just going to mention it. It's called the Vandenberg Coalition. And it's a national security foreign policy facing not-for-profit. And the purpose of it is to prep Republican congressmen, senators, staff members about the issues and help them understand the issues from a Republican point of view so they can articulate them and hopefully legislate in accordance with those principles. So with that, I'd like to introduce Carrie Filippetti and Ambassador Haley.
Hold it up. Does this work better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, great. I have a little bit of laryngitis, but nothing could keep me away from this conversation. And obviously the ambassador will be doing most of the speaking. Thank you so much to Rabbi Shiner and Deanie Shiner, and also Terry and Paul for hosting critical conversations. So let's just get straight into it. I want to start with day one as UN ambassador. So your very first day that you were there, you said, quote, "For those who don't have our backs, we're taking names, and we will make points to respond to that accordingly. Tell us about that first day. What were you responding to? Why did you say that?
Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be here in your beautiful synagogue. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to Rabbi Mrs. Shiner, and thank you to Paul and Terry, and thank you to the Overflow Room, who I told them they would feel the love as well. It's great to be with all of you. You know, when I went to the United Nations, when they first asked me to go work at the United Nations, my comment was, I don't even know what the United Nations does. I just know everybody hates it. And so when President Trump asked, I said, well, you know, I would only do it on a few conditions. And he said, what? And I said, well, you know, I've been a governor. I don't want to work for anyone else, so I'd want to be in the cabinet. He said, done. I said, well, I'm a policy girl, so I'd want to be in the room when decisions are made, so I want to be on the National Security Council. He said, done. And I said, well, I'm not going to be a wallflower or a talking head. I need to be able to say what I think. And he said, Nikki, that's exactly why I want you to do this. And he was true to his word from the first day to the last day. So when I went to the United Nations, I purposely didn't study the do's and don'ts of the United Nations. I wanted to go in with fresh eyes. I wanted to go in and be able to break it a little bit. And I wanted to make sure that countries knew what the United States was for and against. I didn't care if they didn't like me, but I wanted them to respect America. And so that's really the approach that I took when I went in there. I had no idea what a farce it would be. You know, every day it felt like putting on body armor, because you knew you'd have a fight. You just didn't know which country you were going to fight that day. But there's nothing better than defending the country you love so much. So it was a true blessing to be able to do it, and I was very grateful.
So let's talk a little bit about that farce. You spoke a lot about what you called the double standard against Israel. What was that double standard, and how did that reflect itself in your conversations one-on-one with different ambassadors? Was it the same as what they said publicly?
Well, I think that, you know, when I said I was going to be taking names, I didn't know that was going to get as much attention as it was, but it's kind of like, you know, it's what I did as governor. I think it's what we do every day. You're going to have the backs of your friends. You're going to take the names of those that try and stab you in the back. I didn't really know much about Israel and South Carolina. We were the first state to pass the anti-BDS legislation in the country. But the reason that I did that was it was the right thing to do. It wasn't that I had any particular ties. When I got to the United Nations, I knew that one of the first meetings they had was this session on the Middle East. So I was going in there expecting that we were going to talk about all the issues of the Middle East. And instead, they went around the room, and every country, one at a time, bashed Israel. Every single, about any other issues. They didn't talk about Iran, they didn't talk about Syria, they didn't talk about what was going on in Yemen. All they did was bash Israel. And I came out and said to the press, I said, this was supposed to be about the Middle East. That's not what this was. This was an Israel bashing session. And really, that's when I wanted to define a truth. I think there's two reasons for that. One is, when I was growing up in that small rural town, and we were the only Indian family, we weren't white enough to be white, we weren't black enough to be black. My father wore a turban, still does to this day. And when I would get teased on the playground, I would go home and my mom would say, your job is not to show them how you're different. Your job is to show them how you're similar. And if that doesn't work, you kick them back. So when I got to the United Nations, and I think I've been like this all my life, I don't ever want anyone to feel like I did on that playground. And I felt like what they were doing to Israel was abusive. It was bullying, it was wrong, and I made a point to meet with Danny Danone early on, the ambassador to Israel. You know, you're supposed to meet with, the first ones you're supposed to meet are Russia and China and UK and France. I made a point to make Israel one of my first meetings, especially after what I had seen happen. And it was on the heels of the passage of Resolution 2334, which really humiliated Israel. It was something that just couldn't have been a bigger slap in the face to Israel, but the worst part was the U.S. didn't do anything to stop it. And I went to Danny and I said, what happened? Tell me what you think happened. And he said, I got word that they were going to do this resolution. He said, I called the U.S. ambassador multiple times. She wouldn't return my calls. And he actually found out from the Russians what was getting ready to happen. And then when he went to the Security Council, you have all of the Security Council members, and then the one that's being talked about sits at the opposite side of the table. And here they were. They passed this resolution. Typically, the U.S. would always veto it. And the U.S. abstained. And it wasn't even bad enough that they abstained. After it passed, everybody in the audience and everybody at the Security Council table stood up and applauded. And there was Danny sitting at the table. And I told him at that point, never again will you feel the way you felt on that day. I will fight for you every step of the way. And that's what we did.
So you mentioned kicking on the playground. Something else that you famously said was somebody had noticed that you wear heels a lot, which you're wearing today. They said, yes. Why do you wear heels? You said, it's not a fashion statement. It's to kick back, basically. So what was the moment where you felt like you had to really kick back the hardest at the United Nations?
There were many. I mean, and the comment I always say is, I wear heels, it's not for a fashion statement. I use them for kicking. So, but I always kick with a smile. So it's, I think that there were a lot, whether it was, the chemical weapons that Russia and Syria were using in Assad, whether it was when we decided to get out of the Iran deal and we were having to fight back on that, whether it was getting out of the Human Rights Council, whether it was, passing the biggest sanctions against any country in a generation with North Korea. There were so many different things, but the one I think that burned me the most was when we were condemned for moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And in that instant, what made me so upset was the U.S. can put its embassy anywhere we want. We choose to always put it in the capital of every country. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. We were acknowledging a truth.
Did you find on that day, because we exercised a U.S. veto, which you very rarely did you find on that day, how did the ambassadors react one-on-one with you? I mean, it seemed like they were often saying something different in public than what they were saying privately.
Well, there's a double standard. I mean, you had, they would sit there and say nice things. They would go and meet with the ambassador of Israel and be nice to him, but then they'd turn around and stab him in the back at the Security Council, and they would do the same thing with me. And on that day, I was so upset. I went to my office and I said, I want you to get a book together. And I want that book to list all 193 countries. I want the second column to be the percentage of times they voted with the U.S. and against the U.S. because 128 countries had condemned us that day. And I said, I want the last column to be how much foreign aid we give them. Wow. I took that book and I gave it to President Trump. He lost his mind. He's flipping pages and yelling countries. And I said, look, I'm not saying you should give foreign aid based on a percentage vote at the UN, but it should be one of the things we look at. We need to be smart. Quit trying to buy friends. Quit giving money to countries that say death to America. And we were giving $2 billion in military aid to Pakistan. They were harboring terrorists trying to kill our soldiers. And I'll tell you what's happening in America right now. Last year, we gave $46 billion in military aid. Do you know who we gave it to? Iraq, who's literally infiltrated with Iran that says death to America, death to Israel. We gave it to Pakistan again. We're giving it to Zimbabwe, one of the most anti-American African countries there. We're giving it to Belarus, who's literally best friends with Russia. We're giving it to communist Cuba, who we named as a state sponsor of terrorism. We're giving money to China. All of that is ludicrous. You don't buy friends. We need to start being smart in America. You take care of those that take care of you. You stop trying to give money to those that hate you. That's the way we need to start looking at it.
You took another very courageous stand when it came to Israel, which was you withheld $300 million of U.S. funding that was going to what's known as the UN Relief and Works Agency. For those of you who don't know, this is a UN agency that basically creates anti-Semitic schools in Jordan and around the Middle East. So talk us through that process and how controversial that was and why it was important to you.
So UNRWA was an organization that we have given over $1 billion to. And this is the same organization that manages all the schools that go and do anti-Semitic hate in their textbooks. And I actually went to the schools. You saw hate drawn all over the walls. In the books, it's something as simple as, if a Palestinian comes up, if you have 5 Jews and you kill 3 Jews, how many Jews do you have left? Like, it's horrific the way they do it. And so for the longest time, the UN and America would fund this. We were the biggest donor to this. And so I went to the president and I said, hate is hate. Anti-Semitism can't be tolerated anywhere. And said, we've got to stop funding it. And so we did. We stopped funding UNRWA. And we said, until you reform, until you change your ways, we're not going to pay it anymore. And I think that's really important. And I think it's not just anti-Semitism in the United Nations. We really need to focus on anti-Semitism across this country. Because hate is hate no matter what you call it. People love to talk about racism, and they're very quick to call it out. Anti-Semitism is no different than racism. And if we don't treat it the same, and the one thing I'll tell you, which is what I've always believed, call it out every time you see it. Never be shy when it comes to that.
One of the major issues facing the United States today, obviously, is the situation in Ukraine. And what we're seeing is a lot of different perspectives among Democrats and Republicans about what the United States should be doing on Ukraine. As somebody with significant foreign policy experience, what's your view on what America's role in that situation?
Well, first I'll say, with all due respect, your governor is wrong. We need to have the back of Ukraine. When you look at Ukraine, this is a war it's bigger than Ukraine. This is about a war for freedom, and it's one we have to win. Think about what Ukrainians have gone through. Here the men left their wives and their children and went to the front lines to save their country and save their freedom. Their wives said, we're not going to just sit around. They made Molotov cocktails to go do this. They've gone to the front lines. People gave them 5 days. And look at the resilience that they've had. Look at the strength they've had. Their love of country. That used to be us. We used to love our country that much. And the fact that they had lost 27% of their land, they've gained it back. They're down to 15%. Look at how far Russia has fallen. They're getting drones from Iran and missiles from North Korea. That's as low as it gets. They've raised their draft age in Russia to 65. Last week, they're pulling Russians off the street and they're giving them shovels to fight with. But the reason we all need to care about this is in the national security interests of America, because we need to believe dictators when they say something. If we lose this, if Ukraine doesn't win this war, Russia has said Poland and the Baltics are next, and then we're looking at a world war. This is about preventing war. If we win this war, this sends a message to China with Taiwan. It sends a message to Iran with the bomb. It sends a message to North Korea that's doing missiles every other week. This is not the time to get weak in the knees when it comes to Russia. This is a time to double down and get hard.
Speaking of our adversaries, something else you did at the UN was you made the public case for leaving the Iran deal. So talk to us a little bit about your trips to Vienna, to learning about what was going on and why that was such an important issue for you.
So you actually went on that trip. When President Obama agreed to do the Iran deal, and he basically gave planes of cash to Iran, we all know what they did. They used that money and infiltrated it for terrorism, whether it was the Houthis in Yemen, whether it was Hamas in Gaza, whether it was Hezbollah in Lebanon. They just caused destruction everywhere. Because he didn't do it through Congress, there was a bill that was passed that said a president would have to, every 90 days, decide if it was in the national security interest of the United States to stay in the Iran deal. So when President Trump came in, it came for his first time that he had to decide whether to get out of the deal or not. You could tell he had reservations about it. You could tell that he was concerned about whether to stay in the Iran deal. But all of his National Security Council said, you can't get out. You can't get out because you don't know what Iran's going to do. I felt like we needed to look at getting out because I saw what Iran was doing with UN resolutions. They were violating every single UN resolution. And so I went to President Trump and I said, will you let me go to Vienna, where the International Atomic Energy Agency was, the one that was overseeing Iran? Will you let me go and ask the questions? And I will come back and either make the case for you to stay in or make the case for you to get out. So we went to Vienna. He let me go. We went to Vienna, and I'm meeting with the IAEA. And the first question we ask is, okay, we know the research is happening in, the research for production is happening in the universities. How often do you inspect the universities? They said, we don't inspect the universities. I said, okay, well, we know the production is happening in the military installations. How often are you inspecting the military installations? They said, we're not allowed to inspect any military installations. So I said, what is it that you inspect? They said, well, if we get a tip, then we give them 45 days, and then we go and we inspect. We got right back on the plane, and I told the president, I said, not only should you get out of the Iran deal, it would be irresponsible if you didn't get out of the Iran deal. And that's what he did. He got out of the deal.
So in your work fighting U.S. adversaries, you took a very courageous stand in leaving the Human Rights Council, and you've discussed it as a sort of cesspool of political bias. And we've often joked that the folks that are in the Human Rights Council, it's unclear if they're in the Human Rights Council or if it's a list of the worst human rights violators in the world, right? So talk to us about that decision and then the subsequent decision by this administration to get back in the Human Rights Council.
When we initially got to the United Nations, I had heard all of these things about the Human Rights Council, and I told the president at the time, I said, don't get out yet. Let me see if we can fix it. Let me see if there's some good in it. And again, I wanted to be able to make the case because it sounds bad to get out of the Human Rights Council, and I wanted to go and say, is this fixable or is this not something we could do? When you looked at it, the number of resolutions against Israel was abusive. Like, they had 10 times more resolutions against Israel than they ever had on Syria or North Korea or any other tyrant. And the second thing is they had one agenda item, just like that hearing on the Middle East, one agenda item that did nothing that dealt with but just Israel. And then you looked at who was on it. This was like a list of the worst human rights abusers. What they did was they would get on this so that they wouldn't get called out. I mean, you'd have Cuba and you'd have Saudi Arabia. And I remember the year that I was getting in there, the Democratic Republic of Congo went on there. I mean, it was really bad. And so, after we tried to see if they would be willing to change that agenda item or whether they would be able to make sure that you had a good human rights record to be able to get on it, when we couldn't get that, that's when we said, you've got to get out of the Human Rights Council. It's not worth it.
Do you think it's possible to fix at some point in the future, or
no,
the ship has sailed?
I don't think it's possible to fix, and I also think we don't need to be on a commission that says they're for human rights. We can fight for human rights without a commission. We're always going to fight for human rights.
So on that note of what America fights for internationally, America's role in the world, not just with respect to Ukraine, but in general, is sort of being called into question. Why should we focus on what's going on in China, in Iran, all these adversaries that you've mentioned, when so many of us are struggling at home economically?
Because we should be able to balance multiple balls at one time. You know, you have to keep your country safe and strong. It's about national security. But in order to do that, you have to deal with foreign policy. And I'll tell you, we're going to have to deal, the next couple of decades is going to be dealing with international crises. I mean, you see Iran, whether they're trying to build the bomb. You see China. Did you ever think you'd look to the sky and see a Chinese spy balloon looking back at you? I mean, you look at the fact that China just brokered a deal with Saudi Arabia and Iran. That was devastating for us. It just created a superpower with China. You look at what's happening with North Korea, but the one thing that erases all of that is U.S. leadership. When we lead, the world follows. When we speak, the world listens. Who we are, the world wants to be. But we have to show that. All of this that happened, that we're seeing that's happening now, never would have happened had we not had the debacle in Afghanistan. My husband deployed to Afghanistan. He's a combat veteran. The idea that we left Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without telling our allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us for decades because we asked them to be there. Think about what that told our friends. More importantly, think about what it told our enemies. It was the green light they needed. And then you see Russia, and Russia says, we're never going to see U.S. this week, so they move into Ukraine. And we were too little too late. We should have been dealing with that on the first day. And when it comes to Ukraine, you don't need to give money. You don't need to give troops. But you get with your allies and you say, let's go and give them what they need to win. And then when you look at China, Republicans and Democrats thought for the longest time if they were nice to China, China would want to be like us. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be like us. They are communist China. It's narcissistic for us to think that. But look at what they've done. They've built up their military. They have the largest naval fleet in the world. They have more air defense systems than we do. They are modernizing their military. They just created their 5th generation fighter jet by stealing our intellectual property. We basically just handed it on a silver platter. They are a #1 human rights abuser. We said never again would we look away from genocide. You've got 1 million Uyghurs, making them change their name, change their religion, sexual abuse, genocide. And it's happening right now, and no one's saying anything because they're scared of China. And then you look at the fact that China has gone and basically said any company that does business in China has to cooperate with the Chinese military. President Xi chairs that. Think about our tech companies. Think about all of your financial data. Think about all of your healthcare data. Think about our kids' lifestyle data. And know that the Chinese military has that. President Xi said whoever owns the data rules the world. And now you look that we've allowed them to buy 385,000 acres of U.S. soil. Most recently near Grand Forks Air Force Base, where our most sensitive drone technology is. We've got to snap out of it. And it's the thoughts of, for the longest time, people were saying what they're saying about Russia right now and Ukraine. Oh, leave it alone. It'll be fine. Leaving it alone is what got us the situation with China. We have to lead. When we lead, when we have a strong military, when we go and do what I did at the UN and tell countries what we expect of them and what we don't, when we start having that force and build up our military, because strong militaries don't start wars, strong militaries prevent wars. When we do that, everyone will settle down. But we've got to show American strength. There's nothing better than American strength to put the world at peace.
One of the best examples of American strength in the last administration is, of course, the Abraham Accords. How do you think that changes the calculus of the United Nations, if at all, when it comes to Israel? Do you think that will have longer-term geopolitical consequences in the same way it's had economic consequences?
Interesting story. When I was at the United Nations, I and the British ambassador were meeting with the Saudi and the Emirati ambassador, and we were meeting about Yemen. And the Saudis and the Emiratis were so upset because they were saying, why isn't anyone calling out the Houthis? Why isn't anyone helping us in Yemen? Why doesn't anybody see how awful the Houthis are? And I stopped the conversation. And I said, I just want to take a second and tell you everything you just said to me about why we should be condemning the Houthis, I could say the exact same thing to you about Hamas. Why aren't you saying anything about Hamas? Why is it that you continue to take up for the Palestinians over and over again? And they got quiet. We finished the conversation, and then when the meeting was over, they took me outside, and they said, "You're right." And I said, "Then why do you do it? Why do you condemn Israel the way you do? Why do you continue to do this?" And they said, "We do it to satisfy our constituencies." And I looked at the Emirati ambassador, and I said, "At some point, you're going to have the courage to tell your people the truth." You fast forward to the Abraham Accords. That was the Emiratis telling their people the truth. It wasn't that Israel needed the Arab countries. The Arab countries needed Israel. They were waiting for that moment. So you look at the Abraham Accords, it's a beautiful thing, right? You see trade exchange, you see cultural exchange, you see synagogues getting built in the Arab countries. That is a sign that it is possible to have peace in the Middle East. But then what happened? We were this close to getting Saudi Arabia, right? And what happens? You've got a president that turned around and called the crown prince a pariah. A crown prince that's going to outlive every leader in the world. A crown prince that we need to fight Iran. And all of a sudden, what did that do? We ended up going hat in hand trying to ask for their oil. We basically walked them over to China to become friends. We need the Arab countries if we're going to combat Iran. We need the Arab countries if we're going to go forward on making sure that we have peace in the Middle East. So the Abraham Accords is a great start. I went to the Middle East this past summer. The Emiratis don't feel appreciated by the American government for the sacrifices they made. We really need to make up ground. We can do it. I know we can do it, but we're going to have some work that we've got to do.
I have a few more questions, but I do want people to start preparing your own questions because we will be going to the audience soon. There's another phrase, I know I've been quoting you a lot, but there's another phrase that I really associate with you, and I think many of us do. With all due respect, I don't get confused. I'm sure many of you remember this, which sort of became a rallying cry, frankly, for women across the United States, people making sweaters and so on. Did it surprise you that became so popular?
Yes, I mean, that wasn't my intent. My intent was to make a point. You know, I had done the Sunday shows. They always asked me, I never did the Sunday shows on my own. They always asked me to do the Sunday shows, and they always gave me the hardest ones to do. And so on this weekend, we had met as the National Security Council prior, and the president had decided that we were going to put additional sanctions on Russia. And that was on a Thursday. I met with him again on Friday. We talked about the sanctions, how they were coming down. And then Sunday morning, I go and I do the show, and I say, Secretary Mnuchin is going to be, doing sanctions on Russia if he hasn't done them already. And this is going to be really making sure that we're tough, and went on and said what I was going to say. That night, they called me and they said, Secretary Mnuchin called me, who was a friend, and he said, okay, we've got a little bit of a problem. And I said, okay, what happened? And he said, the president decided not to do the sanctions, and, we've got to walk that back. And I said, that's fine. He's the president. He has the right to change his mind. Just say that he changed his mind. They said, well, we'll be putting out a statement tomorrow, and we'll take care of it. The statement they put out the next day did nothing. So all of the press is calling my office. They're all saying she wouldn't say it unless there was a reason to say it. I call the National Security Council. I call the Secretary of State. I called Bolton. I called Pompeo. I called the Chief of Staff. And I said, look, this is not going to go away. Tell the people the truth. Just tell them the truth. They will understand. I'm telling you, the longer you let this go, it's going to get worse. Okay. They just said yes to me. Whole nother 24 hours go by. They don't do anything. We've got the press really saying, Nikki wouldn't say this unless there was some truth to it. And so I called them that morning. I said, you've got until 3 o'clock today. Either you tell the American people the truth or I'm going to tell the American people the truth. At 2:45, Larry Kudlow goes out there. It might have been 3:45, but whenever it was, Larry Kudlow goes out there. And he goes, well, I think Nikki just got momentarily confused. I looked at the television. I saw Dana Perino and knew that she was getting ready to go on the 5. I texted her and I said, can you call me? She called me. I said, can you do me a favor? And she said, what? I said, I need you to go and give, a comment on the record. And she said, okay, what do you want me to say? I said, just say, with all due respect, I don't get confused. She said, that's it? And I said, yes, I will text it to you so you have it in writing. And so then, it wasn't even 5 minutes and Kudlow calls and says, Nikki, I'm so sorry. You know I love you, this, that, and the other. And I said, he's like, I owe you one. I go, no, you do owe me one. And I said, you're going to call the press right now. You're going to tell them that you were wrong, that I was not momentarily confused, that the president changed his mind. And he goes, I can't do that. And I go, oh, no, you can and you will. And to his credit, he did. And then it all went away. But yes, it was a great rallying cry.
So I want to go to the audience. So just one more question from me, and then the rabbi will moderate the Q&A going forward. We spoke a lot about your time at the UN. I would be remiss if we didn't speak also about your time as governor. And in particular, I want to bring us back to 2015. You mentioned the idea of hate in this country and how it affects the Jewish population in particular. You've obviously had your own experiences with hate. As many of you remember, on June 17th, 2015, a white supremacist murdered 9 churchgoers at a Bible study in South Carolina while you were governor. As a response, you removed the Confederate flag from state grounds. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision and about how seeing hatred run through South Carolina, how that has influenced your desire to combat hatred in other forms?
It was truly the saddest moment of my life. I think it was incredibly sad for the people of South Carolina. You had 12 people do what so many South Carolinians do every Wednesday night. They went to Bible study. But on that night, someone else showed up. He didn't look like them. He didn't act like them. He didn't sound like them. They didn't call the cops. They didn't throw him out. Instead, they pulled up a chair and they prayed with him for an hour. And when they bowed their heads in that last prayer, he began to shoot. These were people like Ethel Lance, who had lost her daughter a couple of years prior to breast cancer. But she would go around Mother Emanuel Church singing, one day at a time, sweet Jesus, that's all I ask of you. Give me the strength to do every day what I have to do. We had our youngest victim, Tywanza Sanders. He had just graduated college, had the world in front of him. And on that night, he stood in front of his 87-year-old great Aunt Susie and looked at the killer and said, you don't have to do this. We mean no harm to you. Or it was people like Cynthia Hurd, whose life motto was simply to be kinder than necessary. That's who these people were. They weren't famous, but they loved their family, they loved their community, and they loved their church. It was the first time we had had a shooting in a place of worship. It was on the heels of Ferguson. And I knew I just had to hold my state tight. The national media came in. They wanted to define it. They wanted to make it about, gun control. They wanted to make it about racism. They wanted to make it about the death penalty. And I strong-armed them, and I said, we are not doing this. We have 9 bodies we have to bury, and we need to give respect to those families. I didn't have that luxury because 2 days later, the killer put out his manifesto, and with it, he was holding the Confederate flag and just spewed hate. And I talked with my husband, and the next day I called my staff and I said, I want you to set up 4 meetings. I want one to be with the Republicans, one to be with the Democrat leadership, one to be with our congressional delegation, and one to be with community leaders. And I said, don't tell them what the meeting is about, because I knew they wouldn't come. When we had those meetings, I told them, I'm going to stand at 3 o'clock today and ask for the Confederate flag to come down. If you will stand with me, I will forever be grateful. And if you won't, I'll never tell anybody that you were in this room. And I had my husband with me that day because I thought he was going to be the only one standing with me at 3 o'clock. But we had Republicans, Democrats, we had whites, blacks, we had multiple people standing there. But then the hard work began. The Confederate flag was a very, very sensitive topic in South Carolina. Half of South Carolinians looked at the Confederate flag as service and heritage. The other half of the South Carolinians looked at it as slavery and hate. My job as their governor was not to judge either side, bless you. My job was to take them to a better place. So in order to do that, we had to have 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate. We easily got the vote in the Senate because the pastor of the church was a senator. He was supposed to be in Columbia that day. For some reason, he went to church for that Bible study. And I'll never get over the fact that I called him that night and said, I just heard what happened in the church. I'm so sorry. I will be there first thing tomorrow morning, whatever you need. And it haunts me that the phone was ringing in his pocket after he had been shot. But he had passed. So it passed the Senate very quickly. And then it got to the House. And the Speaker of the House came to me and said, I can't do this. And I said, you have to do it. We have to do this. You've got to get that flag down. He goes there, he comes back, says, okay, I got it. They will take the flag down, but they want to replace it with a different Confederate type flag. I said, no, I don't want the flag. Go back. Tell him again. He comes back and he goes, I got it. No flag. We're going to give you what you want. There's this small thing. They just want to keep the flagpole, but they're not going to have a flag. I said, no flag, no pole. He goes, why? You can declare a win. I had been in the legislature prior to being governor. I knew exactly what they were going to do. As soon as the national media left, they were going to put another flag up there. And I didn't want any other governor to have to deal with this. And I said, no flag, no pole. He said, then you're going to have to talk to him. I can't do it. So I went to that Republican caucus at the time, and I said, I want to tell you a story. I said, when I was little, I would love to ride to Columbia with my dad to the big city. And one day I got to ride with him, and he always loved to stop at produce stands and buy produce from farmers directly. And one day he stopped at a produce stand, and we got out and he's filling his basket. And I look and see the owners at the cash register, and they look concerned. And then I see them get on the phone, and a few minutes later, 2 police cars come up. My dad continued to put the produce in his bag. He went to the register, he thanked them, and he paid for the produce, and we got back in the car. He didn't speak to me the whole way home because he hoped I didn't notice. I knew exactly what had happened. And I told the caucus that day, I said, I have to pass that produce stand every time I go to get on the state plane. And every time I pass that stand, I feel pain. I don't want any child to drive by our state house and look at that flag and feel pain. Take the flag, take the pole down. 1 o'clock that morning, the flag came down, the pole came down, and it was South Carolinians' finest moment because they showed the country and the world what true strength and grace look like.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a few questions. We'll begin right here.
Make good ones. There's nothing I won't answer.
Ambassador, thank you so much for being here. What's the right balance between Israel and China? And what should be the role in the United States in that?
China is America's #1 national security threat. China is decided that its unlimited partner is Russia and its junior partner is Iran. That axis of evil is a threat to Israel. Israel is just trying to defend itself. And Israel's trying to figure out if the U.S. is going to be there for them or not. We have to be able to tell Israel, we are going to stand with you no matter what, no matter who is president. We are going to have your back always. If we did that, Israel won't have to lean near China. If we don't do that, we can't blame Israel for doing what they have to defend themselves.
Thank you very much. This is inspiring.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn to a little bit of political questions for you. Assuming you were to win the presidency, tell me how you can bring the country together, because the division between Republicans and Democrats today is just very unsettling. And I don't care whether you're here a Republican or a Democrat, we have to do something for this country.
We have to understand that we have lots of issues in the country. There are a lot of problems. But the overarching issue that I see in this country is this national self-loathing that's happening. This idea that people are saying America's bad, or that it's rotten, or that it's racist. I was elected the first female minority governor in history. America's not racist. America's blessed. Are we perfect? No. Do we have some work to do? Every day. But we first have to learn to love America again. Our kids need to love America. They need to say the Pledge of Allegiance. We need to go back to do that. What's important to me is my parents came here 50 years ago when America was strong and confident and full of opportunities. I want to prove to them they made the right decision. My husband, who deployed in Afghanistan, I want to prove to his military brothers and sisters and him that their sacrifice mattered, that we do care about our freedom, that it does matter. I have 2 children. My daughter is getting married in a month, and I see, oh, thank you. And I see how hard it is for them to afford a home. And I have a son who's writing papers in college that he doesn't believe in to be able to make an A. We've got to start getting back to what really matters. And the way you do that is you remember it's about addition, right? We need people with us, not divide us. We need to be talking to everybody. You know, I always say my parents were Democrats up until Reagan. Not because they weren't Democrats, but because Republicans didn't talk to them. We need to talk to everybody. And if you did, I don't know your political affiliation, but what I can tell you is we agree on 80% of things. It's the 20% that we fight over. So if we started to work on those, and we just remembered what it meant on how you communicate, doesn't mean you have to compromise on your values. You should always care about what you think. You don't have to have faint hearts, but you communicate it in a way that you have people want to join you, not divide people in a way that makes them run from you.
Hi.
Hi.
How would you solve the problem on the south border, the immigration problem?
Good question. So immigration, if you look at it, he was asking, how do you solve the immigration problem? We have had 4.5 million people cross the border that are unvetted. We know that Iran is saying the easiest way to get into America is through the southern border. We've had more fentanyl cross the border just last year that would kill every single American. You have to look at immigration 2 ways, right? The first way is understand that we are a country of laws. The second you stop being a country of laws, you give up everything this country was founded on. My mom always said, my parents came here illegally. They put in the time, they put in the price. They are offended by what's happening on the border. My mom would always say, if you don't follow the laws to come into this country, you won't follow the laws to live in this country. We have to physically close the border. We need to go back to the Remain in Mexico policy. We need to stop, catch, and release. But we need to do what I did as governor and pass mandatory E-Verify across this country that says anyone in the country illegally cannot be hired for a job. When you do that, they stop coming. We got them out of South Carolina because they knew they couldn't get a job in South Carolina. We have to do that across the country. The other side is legal immigration. It should not take 10 years for somebody to be able to come into this country. We need to look at it as, instead of saying, we're going to bring in this many thousand this year, or this many thousand next year, what does America need? What's the talent that we need? We right now have kids that come over, go to our colleges, we educate them, and then we send them back. That's talent that we need to have. We need to partner with our businesses and say, what is the talent we need? How do we go about and get it? And then bring people that make our country better. Do it on merit. Do it on what we need. That's how you handle immigration, and you make sure that you get processors in place so it doesn't take 10 years. Vet them, process them, tell them yes or no, and move on. Don't keep them waiting for year after year. Oh, she's got a South Carolina flag. You have to call on her. Point of personal privilege.
Thank you so much. And thank you for removing the flag. I lost 4 friends at the AME church. So I have a domestic question for you. Americans are struggling, no doubt, and especially single parents in this country. And this is maybe a bit of a zinger. In 1998, Bill Clinton signed the Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act for child support. We're currently at $160 billion in unpaid child support in this country. And these are court-ordered child support. So there are moms mostly suffering, and we're talking about tens of millions of moms and kids. They're likely voting Democrat because they're getting benefits from all the people here who are paying taxes. What would you say to those moms? This is a 25-year issue, and how they might be able to recover that $160 billion in unpaid child support.
So so this is talking about child support, but there's a bigger issue here, right? You can also relate this to street crime. You can relate this to anything. We have laws on the books for a reason. And what has happened in our courts is it's who has the most powerful lawyer, who pays the most money, and they do continuance after continuance after continuance. We have to go and prioritize that our judges don't let these people get away by just stalling and stalling and stalling. There needs to be a process in place. If you break the law, you have to pay the price, period. And that means, we'd say it with street crime too. We need to get on our district attorneys, start punishing these criminals, start holding them accountable. The same thing with deadbeat dads. Make them do what they're supposed to do. We've gotten so lax on our laws that we're watching everything fall apart. When you go and tell judges, do your job, when you go and tell law enforcement, we've got your back, when you go and tell district attorneys, you've got a job to prosecute or else you need to step away, that's when we bring law and order back to everything. We've got to get back to that place.
Madam Ambassador, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And most of all, thank you for your support of Israel.
Always.
Now my question. At one point you had said that you probably would not run against President Trump. You have obviously changed your mind. Can you share with us today as to why that changed your mind and, of course, why you're running for president?
So, I'm sorry. I have to steal the mic only because we're in a synagogue, we have to be really careful about getting into any campaign-specific questions. So unfortunately, I know it's upsetting, I'm going to prevent the ambassador from answering that question. It's to protect the integrity of the synagogue. That's the only reason. She really would. She really would.
Hi, sorry. First of all, thank you so much for being here tonight. I told my 9.5-year-old daughter that I was coming to see you, and she was like, wait a minute, there hasn't been a woman president of this country? And I was like, no, honey, there hasn't been, but hopefully very soon. So she was very excited. Hopefully a slightly more politically correct version of that question is we've talked a lot about divisiveness tonight, and I'm wondering, I personally as a lifelong Republican see so much divisiveness within our own party, and I'm wondering how you think we can bring the party back together.
I can answer that, right? Okay. So I'd love to answer your question, and I am happy to answer it outside, I think, if let's do that. I think that, first of all, remember, it's all about strong girls. So raise her strong and raise her with confidence and let her know she can do and be anything. The second thing is, when I was at the United Nations, I kicked plenty, but I did it with a smile. And I did it in a way that you don't have to be brash, you don't have to be harsh, and you can still be true to yourself. So what I think both parties have to learn is that we've got to get something done. That's all I care about. Let's get something done. And so they all love to get on TV, and they all love to yap about something, but they refuse to get in a room and actually do it. It's one of the reasons why I think we need term limits in this country. But I think what we need is a leader that's going to say, like I did in South Carolina, I got them in a room and I'd say, we're not leaving until we figure this out. Is go in there and get it done and then show a good face to everybody else. You don't need to feel the back and forth. You need to feel that work got done for you. And I think there's a way that you can express your views, that you can be strong about it, but you don't have to be hateful about it. And I think now it's gotten into a time where the country feels like you have to say the most ridiculous thing to be able to move forward. You get to decide whether that works or not. Don't let it work. We've got to say that we all deserve better, because you do deserve better. Our kids deserve better. Our kids need to know it doesn't have to be this way. And we shouldn't want, as parents, we don't want it this way. And so I think there's a way that how we handle ourselves matters, and there should be a responsibility with elected officials in how they do that.
Thank you for coming. I have one question. I'm of the opinion that the healthcare system in the United States is irreparably broken because the healthcare regulation or approval process is not tied to the compensation for healthcare process. Like the regulation of devices is not tied to the compensation for devices. Like the FDA is not connected to to Medicare and commercial insurance, and it creates this enormous, like, never-ending bubble where basically things get inflated, and we pay and have the best, advances medically in the world in the United States, but the health of our citizens is the worst compared to any other country.
The only way to fix healthcare is to break it. We truly have to do it. And the way you break it is you do a few things. First of all, understand that those doctors don't give you those 10 tests because they want to. They do it for the 90% chance they'll get sued. So do like I did in South Carolina, across this country, and pass tort reform so that takes that off the table. The second thing is, states have what's known as certificate of need. And certificate of need basically says if you've got a hospital here, you can't have a hospital down the street. No other industry lives in a way that there's no competition.